Story 1. Etymology. The dashboard was originally a board on the front of a horse carriage meant to keep mud from being kicked up onto passengers when the horse dashed. Over time, the term came to mean the front part of anything. For example, a computer interface is often called a dashboard. Story 2. Ampersand used to be a letter in the English alphabet. Came after Z in the alphabet. In the alphabet song, after finishing Z, children would sing and per se and, which is where the name ampersand comes from. And per se and basically means and by itself. Story 3. The word barbarian comes from an ancient Greek term referring to all non-Greek speakers, including Egyptians, Phoenicians, and others. To the Greeks, other languages sounded like people saying bar bar bar. This became the root for the word barbaros, which roughly means babble or gibberish. It was later adopted by the Romans to refer to any culture that did not practice Greek or Roman traditions, even though Latin speakers were technically classified as barbarians because they did not speak Greek. Due to xenophobia, it eventually came to mean uncivilized, and from there it entered Middle English. Story 4. I am an entomologist. Some walking sticks copulate for over 70 days. Story 5. Pumpernickel comes from the German words pumpern, to break wind, and nickel, goblin, apparently because it is hard to digest. Their bread was said to be so coarse it would make the devil break wind. 1756. Their bread is of the very coarsest kind, ill-baked, and as black as a coal, for they never sift their flour. The people of the country call it pumpernickel. The Grand Tour, or A Journey Through the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and France, by Thomas Nugent, Volume 2, page 80. Story 6. The word bear in many languages in Europe, including English, originally meant brown thing. There used to be a proper name for the bear, but it became taboo because saying it was believed to summon a bear that would then attack people. The taboo name was eventually forgotten and the euphemism became the name. Ancient people were terrified of bears. The name Arctic derives from the Greek arctos, meaning bear, so it means land of bears. Antarctic thus means land without bears. Story 7. Roger is the modern English equivalent of the Old English and Old Norse name Hrothgar. Hrothgar means famous spear and is the name of the Danish king in the medieval epic poem Beowulf. Story 8. Etymology. The word melon is not particularly interesting in itself. It came from ancient Greek through Latin and Old French into English. Throughout that history it referred to various gourds. The interesting part is that melon was slang for breasts in ancient Greek, and it retained that slang sense alongside its literal meaning into English. Usually a word develops one dominant meaning rather than maintaining both a literal and a slang sense, which makes this case unusual. Entomology. The Japanese redbug, in addition to having a distinctive common name, is one of the few known non-eusocial insects that care for their young after they hatch. Eusocial describes colony-forming insects such as ants, bees, and termites. Story 9. The etymology of tawdry is a real ride. There was a 7th century Anglo-Saxon saint named Ethelthryth. Nobody wanted to pronounce that dense forest of pitch sounds, so she was commonly known as Saint Etheldreda, and later people called her Saint Audrey. Saint Audrey was the patron of the town of Ely, and the people of Ely held an annual fair in her name. One primary product at these fairs was lace. St. Audrey's lace was repeated until it slurred into tawdry lace. Over time, the lace fell out of favor. It was mainly made by peasant women and was viewed as cheap. Puritans also regarded lace garments as ostentatious. Tawdry then began to describe other things that were cheap and showy, giving the word its modern meaning. In summary, tawdry comes from the fact that Ethelthryth is difficult to pronounce. Story 10. The word quintessential has one of my favorite etymologies. You can break it down into quint and essential. Quint means 5. Essential means essence or element. To be quintessential is to be the 5th element of something, its spirit. Story 11. Etymology. Nightmare. The mare part of the word nightmare comes from Germanic folklore, in which a mare is an evil female spirit or goblin that sits upon a sleeper's chest, suffocating them and giving them bad dreams. The word therefore originates from a description of sleep paralysis. Entomology. Honeybees must make about 10 million trips to collect enough nectar to produce 1 pound of honey. Story 12. Etymology. The English word silly has meant many different things since it was first used. The word's meanings evolved from happy, blessed, and pious to innocent circa 1200, then to harmless, pitiable in the late 13th century, weak circa 1300, and by the 1570s feeble in mind, lacking in reason, and foolish. By 1886 it tended towards stunned or dazed, as in knocked silly. I do not know much about bugs besides Drosophila. Story 13. The word apron was originally napron. When people said a napron, it gradually transformed into an apron. I have no bug facts. Story 14. Etymology. Nimrod was originally a compliment referring to hunting skill. Nimrod is a biblical figure known as a mighty hunter, but the meaning changed after Bugs Bunny used the name sarcastically when addressing Elmer Fudd and listeners misunderstood the reference. Entomology. Earwigs have wings and are capable of flight. Story 15. Etymology. Cliché is derived from the sound of dapping ink on type. Anyone who has used an ink roller will understand the sound of sticky ink. It is the repeated sound of a piece of type used regularly and therefore overused. Entomology. Australia had a massive problem with the buildup of animal waste following the introduction of cattle. Native dung beetles only processed the hard, dry dung of marsupials and would not touch the cowpats of imported cattle. Story 16. Etymology. Calcium, calculator, calculate, calculus, and abacus all share an origin in the word calx, Latin for stone. Story 17. The word entomology is from the Greek entomon, meaning insect, which is itself the neuter form of entomos, meaning segmented. Story 18. Etymology. Shibboleth was a Hebrew word for a plant part. At one time it was used to determine whether someone belonged to a particular cultural group because the groups pronounced the word differently. Now it refers to words and phrases that reveal a person's membership in a group, whether by pronunciation or by knowledge. For example, ask a native German speaker to say the word squirrel. They will often be unable to pronounce it the same way as a native English speaker. Entomology. Some wasps inject eggs into a host, and the host is manipulated to protect the developing larvae. The interesting fact is that it is not the eggs that control the host but a virus that the wasp injects along with the eggs. Story 19. Juggernaut. The word is derived from Jagannath, a deity worshipped in India whose name means Lord of the World. Story 20. I love this game. I run a Twitter account about it and enjoy posting to the etymology subreddit. Here are some of my favorite recent items, summed up very basically. I can expand on any of these. First, some etymology facts. Scuttlebutt. Originally a nautical term for a cask, or butt, of drinking water with a hole or scuttle, for drawing it out. The term came to mean rumor or gossip because sailors would gather and chat around the cask. It is the predecessor of the phrase water cooler talk for workplace gossip. Pollution. Before 1860, pollution commonly meant semen, specifically semen released outside conjugal activities. It could also mean defilement or desecration. The words seminal, disseminate, and seminary derive from the Latin semen. Meteor. From the Greek meteoron, literally thing high up. In 15th century English, meteor could refer to any atmospheric phenomenon. Classifications included aerial meteors, notable winds and tornadoes, aqueous meteors, rain, snow, hail, dew, frost and clouds, luminous meteors, auroras, rainbows and other light-based phenomena, and igneous meteors, fiery-looking phenomena such as lightning and shooting stars. Around 1590, the English word began to take on the more specific fiery, extraterrestrial meaning we use today, and meteorology became the study of atmospheric conditions. Ambivalence. Coined as a psychological term by Paul Eugen Bleuler in 1910, literally meaning strength on both sides. Bleuler also coined the term schizophrenia, a splitting of the mind, and autism, from the Greek autos, self. Feisty, meaning spirited or lively, attested from 1896. Earlier feist meant a small dog, a shortening of the Middle English phrase fisting cur, stinking cur, FYST meant to break wind. Supposedly ladies would blame their gas on lapdogs, so feisty ultimately traces back to farty dog. Alchemy, from the Greek chemioa, either from chemia, a name for Egypt meaning land of black earth, or from kymatos, that which is poured out. It was used as a scientific term until the 1600s, when chemistry arose from it and alchemy took on a more mystical sense. Tabby came to refer to cats in the 1690s because their fur pattern resembles a striped silk taffeta, also called tabby, originally via French from the Baghdad neighborhood Atabi, where rich silks were made. The neighborhood was named after the Umayyad prince Atab. Clone, as a term for producing genetically identical individuals, clone was coined in 1963 by John Burton Sanderson Haldane. The horticultural sense of clone, the process of creating a new plant from cuttings, predates that usage. Both senses come from the ancient Greek klon, twig, jargon. Adopted from French in the 14th century, it originally meant unintelligible talk, gibberish, chattering, or jabbering. By the 1650s, it took on its current sense, phraseology peculiar to a sect or profession, because such speech was unintelligible to outsiders. Moxie, in general use from the 1930s, the word comes from the brand name of a bitter syrup first marketed as the medicine Moxie nerve food in 1876 and sold as a soft drink starting in 1884. The brand name may come from a Native American Abenaki word for dark water, from lake and river names in Maine. Praying mantis. The praying mantis, Mantis religiosa, and other insects in the order Mantodia get their name from the Greek mantis, literally one who divines, a seer, prophet, which in turn comes from Maine's tie, to be inspired. Story 21. Orange. The word for the fruit came long before the word for the color. People called objects of that hue yellow-red. William of Orange, William III of England, has nothing to do with either the color or the fruit. Story 22. I love the origin of the word berserk. It comes from Old Norse for bear shirt, where Vikings would put on shirts made from the hides of skinned bears and, I guess, become possessed by the spirit of the bear and go berserk. Story 23. The word oxymoron is itself an oxymoron. The oxy part, as in oxygen, paroxysm, and peroxide, comes from the Greek oxys, meaning sharp or acrid. The moron part, as in the English word moron, comes from the Greek moros, meaning dull. So an oxymoron is literally a sharp, dull turn of phrase. Story 24. The word cue, meaning a long stick used in billiards, comes from the French word queue, meaning tail. The English word queue also comes from the same French word. The Latin word cauda, from which queue ultimately derives, also gave us the English word coda, but that came via Italian rather than French. The word cue, meaning an indication that it is time for something to happen, or as a verb to give such an indication, comes from the letter Q. It originated as an abbreviation for quando, Latin for when, on actors' partial copies of play scripts. To save paper, a copy of the script did not include every line, only the ones just before an actor's lines, marked with Q. Actors therefore had to learn their cues to know when their lines were coming. Story 25. A little late to this thread, but my favorite one is not on here yet. Mortgage. Death. Gage pledge. Death pledge is very fitting for a 30-year loan. Story 26. Etymology. The word avocado comes from the Aztec word for testicle. Entomology. The largest insect on Earth, the weta, has a unique survival mechanism. In winter they appear to die. There is no heartbeat or brain activity and their brains rot. No one knows how they do it, but when the weather warms and the frozen weta thaw, even without brains their hearts restart and they go on to breed before dying permanently. They also hiss. Story 27. You can kill cockroaches with plain isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle. You do not need to buy special bug sprays if you only need to kill them on the spot. Spray them continuously. They will try to run away but usually die within a few minutes. You can trap one in a can and spray it thoroughly with alcohol. It works because the alcohol dehydrates and kills the insect. Use caution. Isopropyl alcohol is flammable and can be harmful to pets if they are exposed. Story 28. Third-year entomology undergraduate here. There are plenty of interesting bug facts. My favorites are parasitoid wasps and mind control. Some parasitoid wasps can inject a toxin into a caterpillar that makes it defend the wasp's eggs from aphids, the wasp's predator. The caterpillar previously would not care if an aphid crawled on it, but afterward it will flick them off. Another interesting parasitoid wasp fact is that some of them, especially ichneumonids, have such sensitive sensory structures on their feet, the tarsi, that they can detect a moving grub inside a tree. Medical researchers are trying to understand this sensitivity to apply it to internal human issues. Here is another fact about flies. Most insects have 4 wings, but in Diptera, the flies, the hind wings are reduced into structures called halteres. Halteres help with flight balance and orientation, which is why flies are so hard to hit. Their halteres detect air movement and allow faster adjustments than a person can react. What is really interesting is that much about insects remains unknown. They are extremely diverse, and even the most important evolutionary innovation in insects, flight, is not fully understood. There are 2 prominent theories about how insect wings developed. I can go on all day. Story 29. Newborn honeybees do not have hardened stingers because their exoskeletons have not dried. Their wings are also still drying, so they cannot fly. This makes working in the laboratory enjoyable because the bees can be petted and held safely. Story 30. The English word bad apparently comes from an old word for hermaphrodite. Persian has the word, pronounced bad, which is said to mean the same thing and developed independently, despite the languages being related. Coincidentally, the Persian word, pronounced better, looks a lot like the English word better and also means better. Story 31. Luciferase, the enzyme responsible for the glow of fireflies, comes from the name Lucifer, which means light bearer. Story 32. In my language, Bengali, the word for honey is madhu and the word for wine is mad. They sound the same because they come from the Sanskrit word madhu, which means honey or alcoholic drinks. That derives from the Proto-Indo-Iranian word madhu, with the same meaning, and from that comes the Persian word may, meaning wine. If we trace further back, Proto-Indo-Iranian madhu comes from the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European word medu or medu, meaning honey, intoxicating drink, or sweet drink. In Greek, methi means drunkenness. In the Germanic branch, medus gave English mead, an alcoholic beverage produced by fermenting honey. In Dutch it is medu and in German it is met, meaning mead. In the Celtic languages, Cornish med, Irish mid, and Gaulish medu all mean mead. In Balto-Slavic, medas appears as medas in Latvian and Lithuanian, mied in Polish, med in Czech, Bulgarian, Serbo-Croatian and Macedonian, and jad in Russian, all meaning honey. In Tocharian, MIT was borrowed into Chinese, so Chinese MIT means honey, having come from the Tocharians. Story 33. In Greek mythology, Hades had a giant 3-headed dog named Cerberus that guarded the entrance to the land of the dead. Cerberus comes from an older Sanskrit word, karibos, meaning spotted. So Hades, the literal Greek god, has a hellhound named Spot. Disclaimer: I am not an etymologist. This is disputed, but I still like it. Story 34. Wow, good timing. I just learned this one today. Etymology of the word clue. The word clue originates with the myth of Theseus, who used a ball of yarn to find his way back out of the Minotaur's labyrinth. The Middle English word for a ball of yarn was clue or clue. When the myth was popularized in England by Chaucer, people began using clue figuratively to mean a hint or guide to solving a problem. Edit, this blew up. I have many internet points now. Obligatory thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Story 35. I don't know much about etymology, but I have some basic knowledge of entomology. Even though most people think termites are closely related to ants because of their appearance and social habits, they are actually much more closely related to cockroaches and have been placed in the same order. Story 36. The Marathi and Cherokee words for squirrel, sololi, are the same by pure coincidence. Story 37. Etymology. The word helicopter is a compound derived from helico, meaning roughly spiral thing, and ptor, meaning roughly flying thing, as in pterodactyl. The compound is helicopter, not helicopter, as commonly thought. Entomology, cochineal dye, derived from crushed insects, is still used as a red dye in the food industry. Correction: insects, not beetles. Story 38. There was an episode of Jeopardy recently in which the final Jeopardy category was surnames. Concerned a common Italian surname associated with speed and style that derives from the Latin word for iron. The answer was Ferrari. I thought that was neat. Story 39. Chinese characters have pictorial roots, if that can be considered etymology. My personal favorite is cheer, pronounced xiu. It means to take, seize, or attain. The radical on the left represents an ear. The one on the right represents a hand or a blade. Together they show a picture of taking an ear in war as a prize to prove a kill. I cannot find sources, but my old teacher said he depicts people pouring blood into a bowl to mix and drink together, like blood brothers. It means to benefit. Story 40. English used to have a letter called thorn that looked like the letter Y. It made the voice th sound as in the word the. That is why you see signs such as ye old shop, pronounced the old shop, not ye old shop. Story 41. Assassin, noun. The word recorded in English from the 1530s ultimately derives from Arabic. In Anglo-Latin usage from the mid-13th century, via French and Italian, it comes from Arabic hashishiyin, meaning hashish users, plural of hashishi, from the word hashish. The plural suffix in was mistaken in Europe for part of the word, as with Bedouin. It originally referred to a fanatical Ismaili Muslim sect in the mountains of Lebanon during the time of the Crusades. They served under the leadership of the Old Man of the Mountains, a title translated from the Arabic Sheikh al-Jibal and applied to Hassan ibn al-Sabah. They gained a reputation for murdering opposing leaders after allegedly intoxicating themselves by consuming hashish. Middle English had the word as hassace in the mid-14th century, from Old French hassasis and assasis, ultimately from Arabic. Story 42. Sophomore means wise fool in ancient Greek. Other words I like include hazard, originally from Arabic alzar meaning the die, because gambling was considered risky. Trivia, originally meaning three roads in Latin, because patricians looked down on such intersections as insignificant and full of commoners. Candidate, meaning white-robed. Avocado in Nahuatl sharing a definition with testicle. Orchid, in Greek meaning testicle. Testify a cognate of testicle. Porcelain, meaning pig's vagina. Vanilla, meaning vagina. Girl, which once could refer to either gender. Toilet, which used to mean closet in French. And many more. Story 43. While carving stone sculptures, a carver could easily make an irreversible mistake, especially if he was inexperienced. To hide errors, they applied wax and shaped it over the flaw. A sculpture with wax was considered impure, and its flaws were taken as a sign of the carver's dishonesty. A popular but disputed explanation traces the word sincere to the Spanish sincera, meaning without wax. It was said to mean without flaw or pure, and now means honest. Story 44. The word vaccine comes from the Latin word vaccinus, which means of the cow. This is because the physician who first popularized the treatment and the term prevented smallpox in children by exposing them to material from a cowpox blister, a milder form of smallpox. Story 45. Etymology. Tycoon is the anglicization of taikuan, an archaic Japanese term of respect derived from the Chinese I Ching. It once referred to an independent ruler who did not have an imperial lineage. Its literal meaning is great lord or great prince or supreme commander. In the Edo period, the word was used as a diplomatic title designating the shogun of Japan in relations with foreign countries, an attempt to convey that the shogun was more important than the Japanese emperor. In English, it generally refers to a wealthy businessman or magnate. Entomology. The Japanese giant hornet, Vespa mandarinia japonica, can inject venom that causes renal failure and death in humans. Hornets and other stinging insects cause around 30 to 40 deaths a year in Japan. They release pheromones that signal colony members to attack a target. They can fly up to 50 miles a day, so fleeing may not prevent pursuit. Story 46. Odonats, the damselflies and dragonflies, have aquatic larvae that capture prey using an extensible mask formed from modified mouthparts. Dragonfly larvae can also propel themselves by expelling water from their rectum. They usually move water in and out because their gills are located there, but they can eject it quickly to escape predators. Story 47. Etymology. The phrase hands down comes from horse racing and refers to a jockey who is so far ahead that they can afford to drop their hands and loosen the reins, which are usually kept tight to encourage the horse to run, and still easily win. Entomology. Female dragonflies feign death to deter unwanted male advances. Story 48. Strygiphilus garrularsoni is an insect, a chewing louse found only on owls. It was discovered in 1990 and named for Gary Larson, creator of the syndicated cartoon The Far Side. In a letter to Larson, Clayton praised the cartoonist for the enormous contribution that my colleagues and I feel you have made to biology through your cartoons. Story 49. Adder is a type of snake notable for the way it slithers and its distinctive markings. In Old English around the year 700, the word for snakes in general was nadir. Early Middle English, the language of the Canterbury Tales rather than Shakespeare, retained this word as natter. Spelling was not standardized then, so a person might say, I saw a natter. According to a Ze Frank video, a dragonfly's reproductive organs are on different body segments. To mate, the male must bring these parts together and mount the female, which requires complex maneuvering and is difficult for both insects. Story 50. Galaxy is derived from the Greek term galaxias, meaning Milky One, which referred to the Milky Way. Therefore, the phrase Milky Way galaxy is redundant. Story 51. The Egyptians had a large temple in Memphis called Chowet Kerpetek. When Egypt grew, the Akkadians assumed the word was the name of the country but could not pronounce it, so they called the country Kikuptak. When the ancient Greeks encountered Egypt, they adopted the Akkadian word and could not pronounce it either, calling the country Aikapitio. A few centuries later, they simplified that to Aegyptos. Later, the Romans rendered it Egyptus. Centuries after that, the French shortened it to Egypti, which English borrowed as Egypt. So the name Egypt traces from Chowet Kerpetek to Kikuptak to Aikapitio to Aegyptos to Egyptus to Egypti to Egypt. Chowet Kerpetek was never the name of the country. Story 52. Very not safe for work etymology coming up. You have been warned. The word vagina derives from the Latin term for sword sheath, meaning the covering for a sword. The word cunt, on the other hand, is a Germanic term that is a descriptive name for female genitalia. One could argue that cunt is a more feminist term for female genitalia because it is not defined by its relationship to the penis. Story 53. In French, dandelion means dandelion. Long ago, someone saw a flower and thought its petals looked like lion teeth, so they named it dandelion. Story 54. Utopia. I think there is a fairly common misconception that this word means good place, possibly because the first part of the word sounds similar to happy words like euphoria and eudaimonia. The word was in fact coined by Thomas More and etymologically comes from the Greek ou and topos, which literally translate as no place or nowhere. I just like that the unattainability of utopia is built into the word itself. Story 55. The word panic comes from the Greek god Pan, whose blood-curdling scream induced fear in anyone who heard it. Story 56. Etymology. We call it copper and Cyprus because of a connection, but we do not know whether the metal was named for Cyprus or the island was named for the metal. No etymology facts are certain. Story 57. Endocrinologist here. Why does no one ever invite us to these things? We have feelings. Story 58. Etymology. Formica is a brand name of a synthetic laminate material, named because it was invented as a substitute for mica. Entomology. Formica is a genus of ants that gave their name to formic acid, which they spray for hunting and defense. Formic acid can occur as a byproduct in the manufacture of formaldehyde, which is used to make phenolformaldehyde resins. One such resin is a component of the laminate material sold as formica. Story 59. My favorite example is the similarity between Portuguese obrigado and Japanese arigato. Although Japan had considerable Portuguese influence, Arigato appears in written records from well before Portuguese contact. In other words, it is a coincidence. Story 60. Etymology. Why do we raise chickens to eat chicken but raise cows to eat beef? After the Norman conquest, French became the preferred language of the court, while Anglo-Saxon remained the language of the common people. The Anglo-Saxon word for cow was cu, pronounced coo, and the French word for the meat was bœuf, pronounced buff. Poor people raised coos so rich people could eat buff. Chickens were not widely eaten by the upper classes until much later. Entomology. There's a black dragonfly that hangs around my workplace sometimes. I think it is pretty cool. Correction. Anglo-Saxon, not Welsh. Story 61. I do not know the difference between etymology and entomology. It really bugs me. Story 62. The word bully. Very near where I grew up in Denmark, there is a swamp called Ballemosen, named for the plant mosebaal which only grows in that region. This swamp was once a meeting place for a gang notorious for stealing hats and assaulting strangers. They took the names Bolsjacket or Bollefornen, the latter literally meaning association of bullies. Over time, the prefix ball became a general term for troublemakers and ultimately spread to other languages. Story 63. Sailing terminology is everywhere. Taken aback. This happens to a ship when the wind shifts and the sails are suddenly blown backward into the sailors' faces, causing the ship to lose forward momentum. Learning the ropes. When a new sailor literally learns which rope is connected to which part of the ship. Boarding, literally getting onto the boards of another ship. Today, it is also used for getting onto an airplane, even though very few airplanes have wooden parts. Keeping things on an even keel. The keel is the lowest part of a ship's hull, running down the middle and cutting through the water. Sailors want an even keel so the ship stays on a smooth, steady course. Now the term describes any situation where people want to keep things steady. Limey. A semi-derogatory nickname for British sailors, who used limes or lime juice to prevent scurvy at sea. Today it is sometimes used for all British people. Groggy. Grog was a mixture of rum and water that sailors drank. If you were groggy, you were either drunk on grog or hung over from it. Now it describes being tired and fuzzy-headed. Loose cannon. Literally a cannon that was not secured in place and started crashing into things. Cannons were heavy iron pieces with wheels. If not secured, they could roll across a ship's deck and cause major damage. Today, the term describes a person who is unpredictable and likely to cause harm. Horse carriage terminology. Dashboard. There was literally a board in front of the carriage driver to protect the driver from mud and gravel dashed up by the horse's hooves. Now it refers to any surface covered in controls, including computer screens. Hold your horses. You hold the reins of the horses to slow them down. Old machine terminology. Keyed up or wound up, referring to old clocks and clockwork machines that you wound up with a key. Hanging up a phone. On old phones you had to hang up the earpiece when you were done. Fired up, referring to steam engines. Now it means someone full of energy or starting up a piece of technology. Uppercase and lowercase. The individual metal letters used in a printing press were kept in cases. Smaller letters were in the lowercase so they were in easy reach. Larger letters were in the uppercase because they were used less often. Stereotype. Originally a word for identical copies of the same document from a printing press. Now it describes assumed identical characteristics across social groups. These facts are from a previous comment I made in another etymology-related thread. Story 64. If people in this thread do not know it, the Illusionist podcast with Helen Zaltzman is a great listen for word nerds. Story 65. Etymology. Niggardly is a word that people sometimes get fired for saying because it sounds racist. However, its root is from Old English, Scandinavian, and Germanic words meaning miserly or stingy, and it has nothing to do with Romance words such as negger, negro, or neger. Story 66. Drones are male honeybees. They have a grandfather and a grandson, but no father or son. This is because a drone develops from an unfertilized egg. The queen does not need male sperm to lay a drone egg, so there is no father. The queen herself developed from a fertilized egg and therefore has both a father and a mother. I am not an entomologist, just a beekeeper. Story 67. Fact 1. Butterflies retain memories from when they were caterpillars, despite their bodies breaking down during metamorphosis. Fact 2. Some moths and butterflies undergo metamorphosis without developing a digestive system. They live off the food they consumed as caterpillars. Fact 3. A jumping spider has intelligence comparable to that of a dog. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.